Welcome back to Learn at Lunchtime. So glad everybody could join us today. We've got a great program that we're looking forward to. So now I'm going to be welcoming in our Curator of Fine Art, Amy Hammond, who is going to introduce our program.
Thank you, Sherry, and thank you for joining us today at this very special meeting of Art and Science. I'm really excited about this program because conservation is vital to the preservation of collections, and I always learn about how an artist works, including Violet Oakley. And I'm going to share my screen here. And to add some context to this program, all of the 5 drawings we were about to discuss are part of a larger collection of works by Violet Oakley, who created them from 1911 to 1917, while developing her themes and ideas for the Senate Chamber murals, which was her second commission at the Pennsylvania State Capitol. And here are a few examples of some of the other works in our collection on the left, and on the right is the final installation of the paintings on canvas that were installed in the chamber. And the impetus for this conservation project was an exhibition titled Picturing a More Perfect Union, which was open at the State Museum from November 19th, 2019 until June of 2020. And to preserve the significant collection, we sought the expertise of Heather Hendry, who is the Senior Paper Conservator at the Conservation Center for Art and Historical Artifacts in Philadelphia. And prior to joining the staff of the Conservation Center in 2015, Heather maintained a private practice outside of Philadelphia. She also worked as a paper conservator at the Canadian Conservation Institute, the Yale Center for British Art, and the Harvard University Library's Weissman Preservation Center. And we will be posting a full bio of Heather's and a link in the chat box. And welcome, Heather.
Hi, Amy. Thank you.
Okay, and before we take a look at the drawings, I did include an image of the final mural just to kind of add a context of where the individual drawing that we're looking at fits within the overall mural. And the one we're about to see is from this area on the left. Okay. And this first drawing, and before we get started, I wanted to ask Heather, how did you become interested in conservation?
Well, I think conservation is a perfect fit for me because it's a combination of both science and art. So I really love getting to use my hands and work on the objects, but also understanding the chemistry that's underlying it. And it's something you can keep learning at your whole life.
It's a perfect fit then. And was this collection of drawings, was it a pretty typical project for you?
Well, at the Conservation Center, we work on such a wide range of projects, from a very tiny personal letter that belongs to one person, or an enormous collection of thousands of objects for a large institution. So this project was actually sort of a model of exactly how we like a project to go. And so it was great in that way. That it started out with working with Amy, and I went on site and did a survey of the drawings to get an overall feeling of all the work that needed to be done and what condition issues we were both concerned about. And then as we prepared the plan for what would be done, we had input from art historians as well that really informed our treatment decisions as well. And then it went all the way through, so that we also, after doing the conservation, we put these into safe housing so that they could be displayed and stored safely for the future as well.
Great. And when this particular drawing arrived in your office, what were your first impressions? What did you think when you saw it?
Well, this one, it's maybe not clear from the picture, but this is actually something that having the input of the art historians was so useful, because it's 2 pieces of paper. The actual drawing that Violet Oakley prepared has been mounted onto another much larger paper, which has that gold outline on it. And we don't necessarily we didn't love this backing for a number of reasons. We saw these mounts on a few of the drawings, and they were causing some discoloration that was transferring onto the drawing. The gold paint on some of them was flaking, and there was also some distortion of the drawings from where it was glued on with little glue dots at the corners. And so we didn't really think that it was a great mount, but we learned from the historians that these mounts were actually applied by Violet Oakley and her partner. And it was part of a selection process when, after the project had been completed, they were selecting some of these drawings as the ones that they thought were really standalone artworks as well. And so the addition of that mount was a very important part of the story and what that object was. And so that really transformed how we would approach it, that instead of maybe just removing it, instead the mount became part of the object. And so we treated both of these together. And in this case, we separated the two because you see in the before picture how much more yellow the paper is around the drawing itself. So we separated the two drawings, but we washed both the drawing and the mount. And so it lightened up the overall tone of the drawing more. But the mount was also made to be more stable. And then we hinged them back together so that they're lying flatter together and they'll be safer for the long term.
This was really fascinating for me. I had seen and I'm going to show the detail here. I saw this, the way these were together, but first I didn't know that there were two pieces of paper initially that were adhered. And then, she drew this graphite line around them, and I don't know if that was for matting purposes or not. And then she drew, they painted this gold inner border. And I just think it's just such a fascinating insight to her thought process. And we're so lucky to have this enormous archive. We have almost 400 works by Violet Oakley in the collection, and she did a great job preserving her own work, and which is wonderful because now we can share them. And our second drawing is of this figure right here. This is Lincoln at Gettysburg, 1863 is the name of the mural. Okay, and what were your concerns with this particular work?
So we were just talking about when we wanted to save a backing. This drawing was on a backing that we really thought could not be saved. It's not another piece of paper. It was like a heavy, solid cardboard that was really acidic. And you see the little chips in the corners in this before picture. This is a case where the backing itself was so brittle that every time it broke, it was breaking off a little piece of the drawing as well, even though the drawing paper itself was not that bad. And so this was a case where we really felt it had to come off of the backing because it was putting it into a lot of danger. And I also think the backing was not as original because it was not the style that we saw in the other ones.
Oh, that's interesting. What made you think that the backing wasn't original?
I think I think just having seen how she was mounting all of the other ones, this one was, instead of being put with little glue dots at the corners, it was glued overall. The entire surface was covered with glue, and then it was mounted to this very rigid board instead. So it's not to say it was impossible that that was done by her, but it seems unlikely. And you also see the little label in the bottom corner suggests that maybe this was not that one actually on the back, the little paper label.
Okay.
I can't actually read it, but I think that was suggesting that that was from a different part of its life than from the period when they were putting them on the other backings.
And this is a before and after that shows the front of and how they changed through the process.
Yeah, so after we took it off the backing, we were able to wash this drawing as well. And most of the materials, most of these drawings were charcoal and they're very sensitive to being touched, but they're fairly stable in water as long as the water isn't floating the media off. So we can get it moist and get the yellowness and the acidity to wash out of it without actually disturbing the media. The one exception is the stamp, and this is an interesting part of how these drawings were really preparatory drawings rather than finished artworks. So she's got it squared off. She was using this drawing to make her mural and not necessarily thinking of it as a finished artwork that she signed. But then at some point after, she came through and put these stamps that have her signature, and then that square is a really beautiful little logo that she had as well. The stamps, unlike the charcoal, are a little water sensitive. So in this case, we really had to work to protect that during the washing process. And we were so concerned I used two different fixatives on it at the same time. A solvent that's just a water repellent solvent, and then also a wax that we use frequently when we wash. And this specific wax, unlike most waxes, it actually evaporates at room temperature. And so you can use it. We apply it by melting it on, and it's a very solid, firm layer for a couple of days. But then it starts to just evaporate into the air and it removes itself. So there's no trace left behind of what we've applied. And in that way, we could protect just this one tiny area of the ink while we wash the whole piece and get a lot of lightening of the yellowness and improving the stability again.
That sounds almost magical, disappearing wax. Why was it so important to preserve the stamp that's on the bottom?
Um, I think that it's almost like a signature. It adds so much value and tells you about the process. And the fact that it's not a signature is also interesting information. So I think that it's just such an important part of what the object is and how it's lived through its lifetime. And I will also say, if we had not protected it, it would not be completely gone. Instead, we'd have sort of a messy red blurry thing that would look much, much worse as well. So,
Best to keep it intact.
yeah.
Then. And our third drawing is from the International Understanding and Unity mural, and it's from the right side over here. Okay. And what was your approach with this one?
This one got a very, very gentle touch because it's such a gentle drawing. It was really in quite good shape as it is. So really, we only did the lightest bit of surface cleaning and mending on it. One thing that jumped out as soon as we looked at it, of course, was the stain on the left side, which we did not want to interfere with because, again, we're always thinking about the history of these objects and what they were used for. And so, as studio drawings in Violet Oakley's studio, this at some point got oil paint on the back of it. And Amy's put in a little detail of the back side of it. You see the white and the green paint there. That's oil paint, and then it gets those halos around it, which is the oil is seeping into the paper. And then over time, it will darken and discolor. But it's really part of the history of the object as well.
Why was it so important to leave the oil paint stain on the front?
I think because it is part of understanding what this object is. And so her drawings are so beautiful. It's so easy to look at them as just works of art. And we can appreciate them that way, but they're also objects that had another meaning when they were made. And they were meant to be a drawing that gets you to that mural. And so the evidence that shows how she got there is also part of the object.
I think this is one of my favorite conservation stories. And I love thinking about Violet Oakley in her studio and thinking about her. You know, she had this enormous project to finish for the Senate chamber, which is such an important platform, and she had these she had this wonderful vision for what she wanted to do. And I love thinking about her moving these, these drawings around in these papers and thinking about proportions and where she wants to position everyone. And as an illustrator, she was so interested in gesture, and everything, every single individual was placed for a specific reason, and the way they were standing was important. And I love thinking about her just, moving onto her palette or something, or however that oil paint was transferred there. And it remains there. It's just kind of this very real evidence of her working process. Okay, and our next two, these are before and after. So I just share these so you could see that her original oil paint remains. Our next two drawings are from this mural, which is Washington marching the troops through Philadelphia. And let me go back and just point out that the final mural, the figures are here. Okay. And what did you notice during your initial review of this drawing?
Well, we just talked about the stain that we wanted to keep, but this is really a case of stains we don't want to keep. This was really jumping out at me. These stains are not harmful to the object. They're not making it weaker or more brittle or more likely to tear, but I think they really distract from the image. And this is foxing, which develops in the paper. It's not a result of anything that Violet Oakley has done the way the oil stain was.
I think that was a really important distinction for me, was the oil stain was something that was from her hand. And this could have happened at any point in time in the 100 years after it was created, but it was not something that she intended. And well, how did you remove the foxing from the top?
Uh, we washed this drawing as well, and in this case we used a chelating agent, sodium citrate, which is sort of a new development in paper conservation. I feel like we barely knew about this 5 years ago, and it's really wonderful because it will lighten things, but it's not a bleach. What it is, when I say it's a chelating agent, it is grabbing and holding. So molecularly, it will fit around a stain. It will fit around the colored matter and lift it off of the paper in a way that just water doesn't always do. And so foxane itself often has a metallic component, so it responds really well to a chelator that will take out some of these metal impurities. And that's also helping to ensure that it won't come back again in the future. The washing with the chelator did not completely remove it. This was a case where we did have to use a tiny bit of a very dilute bleach as well on some of the very darkest stains. And in that case, when we got down to that level, we were working with a fine brush and applying the bleach in liquid with suction. So it was on a flat plate with suction being pulled straight down, so that we're very careful that the bleach doesn't move outside of the stained area, because you certainly don't want a whiter halo around that stain. And then that's rinsed out thoroughly using the suction as well to pull any chemical out, because you don't want to leave any sort of a bleach residue in the paper, which can also lead to long-term discoloration, actually, and your stain area will turn brown again if you don't get it rinsed out all the way.
Very delicate balance.
Yeah.
Certainly. Let's move on to our fifth drawing. Whoops. It is also from the Washington Marching Through Philadelphia mural, and it is here a compositional study, so you can kind of see how the two relate. And what type of paper is used in this drawing? This one's a little different.
So this is a tracing paper, and I really love tracing papers. They had them even 100 years ago. They're made translucent through a number of different techniques. It could be by just beating the fibers very much more during the paper making process. Some tracing papers were made by coating them with oil or some other resin that made it more transparent. And so she's using it in this way because she's trying to sort out her composition. So being able to lay this over top of other images and move it around, but was very useful during her process. But tracing paper is also really delicate compared to another piece of paper. And so this was one of the most fragile of the drawings that we looked at as well.
There was something also going on in this drawing, and there is a, this looks almost like, would you call this a Scotch tape that was around the perimeter?
Yeah, very much so. So, we don't say Scotch tape because I can't identify
Oh,
a
okay, sorry.
brand. I can't
Okay,
identify
tape.
brands. So, no, I'm going to tell you, we always say pressure sensitive tape, which is a little abstract and a little fancier than we really need to get because it's the class of tapes that attach by pushing on them and the adhesive is sticky. Um, and so these can be either rubber based or acetate based, but this is a thing that definitely was not available in the 19 teens when Violet Oakley was working on these. This was not in production in 1920, so she's not the one who applied this to use it. And these tapes also have really terrible aging properties. I would encourage anyone who's watching to please never use tape to fix anything that's important to you, because what it tends to do, the adhesive is sticky when you put it on, but then as it ages, it will first penetrate deeper into the paper. And so it soaks in and becomes more and more attached over time. Sometimes it will harden up and lose its attachment so that it's cracking and breaking off and not doing what it's supposed to do. It also makes the paper discolor and turn more transparent. And at a certain point as it ages, it will become completely impossible to remove. So we like to get it off while it's as fresh as possible. And in this case, this one was fresh enough that it was still sticky. So we were able to remove it with a combination of heat and erasers and a little bit of mechanical and solvent action as well. And it was very touchy because the paper itself was so fragile as well.
And I will share, do the big reveal for the after. And this is a great photograph because it gives you, you can kind of see that the tracing paper is slightly translucent, but you can also see that all of the tape was removed from the perimeter. And I actually threw in a bonus work to share. This is a political sign or a fan that is currently featured in the Why Not in Pennsylvania suffrage exhibit that will be open at the State Museum through 2021. And the conservation and the exhibition that we did for the Violet Oakley drawings was part of a celebration for the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. And we did the Picturing the Perfect Union exhibition. We also did open up a suffrage exhibit that came not long after that. And this is also a great follow-up because you can see there we had a tape situation here, didn't we, Heather?
Yes. Yes, and that's exactly what I was saying, where the tape will turn that terrible yellow color and become harder and harder to remove. And clearly, the fan had had a rough life and needed to have the pieces held together at some point, but we managed to take off the tape and instead we bended it again with a Japanese paper and wheat starch paste, which is completely stable and will not deteriorate and cause more damage. And it will also always be completely reversible if someone at a future point decides that a better job or a different job could have been done, that can be removed easily forever.
That's great. And I also included a photograph of the reverse side and also more tape on the back. You must see tape a lot.
Although tape's terrible, it's one of my favorites to help to work on though.
Well, you did an excellent job with this as well. We're so happy to be able to show it without these much later additions. And we are actually in at a perfect time to do some question and answer.
Yep, just to remind everybody, we got several questions in the question and answer box, but this is a great time. Use that box, and we will try and get to as many as we can.
Okay. And Heather, how do you wash a drawing and what is the process?
Okay, so that sounds very, very aggressive when we talk about washing and you imagine how you might wash something. What we do very, very often, and I would say always in the case of a drawing where it has media that could possibly lift off or transfer, is first we gently humidify the paper because paper always expands as it gets wet. And so we want to get the water vapor in there and the paper just relaxes more and more. At all points during this process, the paper is supported on some other support because it's too weak to hold once it becomes humid. And so we use a polyester web, which is completely water stable, but allows water to go through it as well. So that's how we always lift and move the paper while it's wet. For some objects, we might put them into a shallow tub of water, like a photographic developing tray with water in it. For a drawing like this, we generally wash on top of just a piece of fabric that's saturated with water. So the water moves up and down into the paper through capillary action. And as it does that, it's pulling out the acidity and the yellowness that we're trying to remove. The water that we use is very carefully conditioned as well, that we have a deionizing unit in our lab. So it's removing everything from the water and it's very pure instead of using the Philadelphia tap water. And then after we've purified the water, we'll add things back in that are known to be good for the paper as well, because this purified water is actually very hungry and it will steal out some of the things in paper that we want to leave there as well. And so we will add calcium to the water in order to prevent removal of calcium from the paper. And depending on what we're working on, we may add other chemicals if we're looking for a very specific result. But in most cases, we wash out everything that we've added very thoroughly with calcium and water at the end.
Sounds like a very delicate process.
Yes.
And we have a question here. How did the museum acquire the drawings? And I can answer that one. The Violet Oakley collection was donated to us in 1982 by the Violet Oakley Memorial Foundation. And they brought the drawings to our care because we were in such close proximity to the Capitol where her final murals are installed that it was just kind of a natural partnership. And how do you choose which particular parts of a work to be restored?
I'm not sure, actually, Amy, I'm not sure if that question is about which parts we conserve or which parts you chose to show us. But what we were doing is looking for damage and for unsafe conditions in all of the drawings that we saw. And then we didn't always recommend treatment if we thought that an object was stable and looked all right. We certainly would not treat it if it didn't need something. And then once we have our recommendations, then the curators will think about which drawings are more important to the story they need to tell, I think.
And as Heather mentioned during this initial process, she came to the museum and she did a review to every single one of them. So she knew before we delivered the work to the conservation center, she knew what was coming. We didn't surprise her. And what are the 5 most important terms in paper conservation?
Yeah, that feels like a job interview question.
Sorry.
I'd say the most important thing for paper is an alkaline environment. And so we are often worried about the paper having inherent acidity. And it's also very important for all of the housing materials. If you put it into a folder or into a window mat, that should also be alkaline instead of acidic. And words like archival don't really mean anything. They just mean, oh, you could use it in an archives. But alkaline has a very specific meaning, and it's definitely good for paper. Um, and I think the other 2 things that are the best thing you can do for paper is to protect it from light, because a lot of drawing media and also papers themselves can be light sensitive and damaged by both visible and ultraviolet light. And also to protect it from high humidity. This is something that will weaken paper over time. It can start mold growth. It will make the foxing that we saw will get worse much faster in a time of high humidity. And so I think alkalinity, protecting it from light and protecting it from humidity are the best things you can do.
Very useful advice. How long does it take to typically clean drawings like these?
There's 2 levels of cleaning that we do. And so we might do a surface cleaning, which is just removing any grime from the surface that we can, which can be very delicate when there's friable media like the charcoal. And so often the worst thing to do would be to start to clean it and then leave sort of a grimy halo around the lines because you don't want to get too close. And in general, that might be half an hour or an hour to do that very carefully. But I have definitely spent 12 or 15 hours cleaning a drawing in a case where it was very delicate. And I think in one case, I needed to go in after someone else had cleaned and left grimy halos. I was going in with the tiniest eraser right next to the lines, trying to smooth that out. And that was, definitely a couple days full work. And that does happen sometimes too. Um, the washing process is usually a thing that's completed in one day, but that can vary as well.
And we took a total of, I think, 60 drawings to the Conservation Center in total, and that was months of work to get them all ready to go, ready for exhibition. And how do you prioritize pieces for conservation?
Well, it's very interesting, and we work with curators all the time in that I can say how urgent a condition issue is, but then it's also the curator's decision to say how important is this piece to the story that our museum is telling. And so I definitely, the things that are the most absolutely urgent that need to be addressed right away are mold and flaking paint. Neither of those were in this collection. And so those are things I would insist you deal with at once. But if it's a case of, washing one print versus another, that's more a question of for the owner of which one do they really want to have looked after the most.
A lot of important considerations for sure. And was the oil paint on the drawing her trying to figure out different colors to use? And are the colors used on the mural?
Do you know that, Amy? I can't. It doesn't look deliberate to me, but I don't really know about how the colors compare.
I thought that they probably were used. They were a white and a green and a blue, which green and blue are very predominant colors, and of course she used a lot of white too. So I would say that they could probably be found in the final murals. And we have another question here about foxing. What are some factors that cause foxing?
Oh, well, foxing is a very mysterious condition, and I think part of that reason is because we identify it visually, and it can have more than one cause. And so there's generally metal contamination is part of foxing. Usually iron would be the metal that you suspect, and you can kind of see from the color that it resembles rust a little bit. Um, the other thing is there's usually a microbiological component to foxing. And so it's not an actual mold growth. We're not seeing any of the shapes of mold that you would normally see. If you go under a microscope, you will not find mold in the foxing, but it definitely seems to be biological in some way. And so for both of those causes, keeping the humidity down will help restrict both metal-induced deterioration and microbiological deterioration as well. So we're not completely sure the causes, but we do know how to keep it from getting worse.
And I have another process question here. Is everything in the process done by hand, or is anything done electronically or mechanically?
I'd say almost everything we do is done by hand, but we do use a lot of equipment as we do it. Like I mentioned, our suction devices. So we're applying the bleach very carefully by hand, but we do have a machine that's helping us to control it. But it is largely an individual handwork way of working.
And we have a question here. Are the Oakley archives open to researchers? And I can follow up with an email about this, but there are Oakley archives in quite a few different places. So that would depend on which specific location you are looking for. There, again, luckily Violet Oakley was very good about saving her work and her documentation. So there are a lot of institutions that have her collections. And is white artist tape considered better than other tapes? You probably get this question a lot.
The white artist tape has its uses. I would like to not see it applied to artworks themselves. And definitely not for a permanent use. I think that one benefit it has is that it's like a masking tape in a way that it's made to be removable. And so if an artist is actually in the process of going out, making a drawing, and they need to hold their paper down temporarily, that would be one thing. I still don't love that idea. I would rather you find another solution, but because sometimes not all of the adhesive comes up when it's removed. Uh, but in that case, maybe it's a fairly good solution. It's not a good solution for a permanent repair of something that's torn, because if it's left in place, that adhesive will also deteriorate in the same way as any other pressure sensitive tape.
Thank you. And this is a question particularly for you, Heather. Is there any particular restoration that you feel gave you the most rewarding result? That's a good question.
I have a new interest right now that I've been working on Indian prints, and uh, it's uh, I feel like I love the paper so much. It's a very unusual paper, and that we often deal with Western papers, and in the conservation world, we often deal with Asian papers that are Japanese papers or Korean papers that are either artist made on them, or we use it in our restoration. And learning about this Indian paper, it looks more like a Western paper in that it's opaque and it's got like a solid surface to it, but it acts like an Asian paper, like a Japanese or a Chinese paper, in that it's so open and responsive to everything that I do. So this is a really, really specific thing that these characteristics of paper are just delighting me so much. So that's what I'm very interested in right now.
That's fascinating. I have learned a lot about paper. I had no idea. I knew that artists were very particular about the paper that they used, but I had no idea what a variety there was. And paper plays such an important role in how the media reacts, or kind of so much about what they're looking for in presentation in the final product. And I'm still learning a lot about that. And we have a question here about the preparatory drawing about the interracial groups. And there's a person bending down, and the figures in that group are, in the final mural, they're reaching out towards the water of life, which is symbolic of justice and freedom. And I can follow up with that person as well to give more details. And I see Sherry coming back, and I think we
got it through.
Are at a good place to stop. So thank you so much, Heather, for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if there are a couple of things I think, Amy, you're going to follow up on, and any other remaining questions, go ahead and put those in the chat box or email me. I'll put in the chat box as well information on that. Thank you guys so much. Let me share my screen for some of the follow-ups here. Coming up, not too long away, right, Amy?
Yes. Art of the State has 21 more days to register.
Yeah, so get in there. We want to get everybody signed up. Coming up, Amy, you're going to be talking with Marta Sanchez. This is, I mean, through my career, this has been one of the more prominent paintings that we featured in the museum. So I'm excited to learn a lot more about this painting. And then we've got lots of other programs coming up for our Learn at Lunchtime. We're going to be talking about gardens next week. And so check all that information out. And we hope to see everybody back soon.